And by learning their language, Louise actually learned how to do this and then is able to teach the rest of humanity how to do this.
Really, another way of phrasing this is, can language do what psilocybin does?
That would be mushrooms for those not familiar with the scientific term.
Clean.
3, 2, 1, punch it.
Could you jump to light speed in that tin can? Go back in time in the DeLorean? Will it crash or take to the sky? Tell me, smart guy, does it fly?
Welcome to Does It Fly, the podcast that puts your favorite sci-fi properties, inventions, and conceits to the test. I'm your mad scientist, Hakeem Oluseyi.
And I'm your pop culture expert, Tamara Krinsky. Time to dive into today's topic and see, does it fly? What you all just missed was me doing a little hype up for Hakeem, who could use some coffee, but is here and ready to play.
I am sleepy, y'all. I've been working hard and I ain't been sleeping, so I'm sleepy.
I know the feeling. Actually, you're Hakeem Oluseyi, aka Dr. O. I'm Tamara Krinsky, and this is Does It Fly? And we are so happy to have you here for this episode of our podcast.
Thank you for joining us. Here we talk about the nerdy, geeky stuff, and today we're going off planet. We're going, on planet, off planet, same thing. If the aliens come to us, we're talking about the aliens. And you know, one thing I love about the creativity in sci-fi is that from time to time, I get completely new alien species.
And that is definitely the case in the movie we are talking about today. We are talking about the movie Arrival, which is a 2016 movie by Denis Villeneuve, a French-Canadian director known for movies like Sicario, Blade Runner 2049, and Dunes. I was saying plural because there's two. Dune Part 1 and Part 2. Yeah. There's many Dunes, but the most recent Dunes, Part 1 and Part 2. I'm just going to say, I have to say, he is one of my favorite directors. Arrival was based on a 1998 short story called Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang. And then it was adapted for the screen by Eric Heiserer and directed by Denis Villeneuve. And it stars Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner as two folks who are called in by the government to help investigate and interpret the language of a newly arrived alien species. There are 12 ships that suddenly appear around the Earth, each over different countries, and they want to know two main questions. Why are you here, and what are you going to do to us?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And luckily, they don't eat the people. You know what I love about this movie? When I looked at television shows, I remember being a teenager and wondering, why are so many shows made about the lives of either medical doctors or police, right? Those were the two occupations. And then we started getting finally the astronomer heroes, right? Most notably Contact. But now with this movie, the linguists are the occupations that are the heroes, right? And so I've only knew of one linguist originally, and it was Noam Chomsky. And then I discovered John McWhorter, because they are, they speak about politics, they speak about culture and these sort of things, current events. But I had never thought of how could a linguist save humanity?
Well, they definitely try to answer that in this movie. And you've got, Amy's character, who's a linguist. And then you have Jeremy Renner's character, whose name is, she plays a character named Louise, Dr. Louise Banks. And he plays Ian Donnelly, who is actually a scientist. And that there's some friction between them about how they are interpreting what is being sent by the aliens. And the aliens in this movie, they're dubbed heptapods. Because 7, because that's what we can see of them. They're sort of swimming in either a gas or some kind of liquidy substance. They're more aquatic. They have 7 limbs that we see and that they communicate with. And what we're going to talk about today specifically is their language. And okay, this is where I'm going to give a spoiler in the very beginning of
Spoiler alert.
our show. So we can't talk about what we're going to talk about today without some heavy, heavy spoilers.
Yeah.
So this is one of those where I would, and I think it's important for this movie to actually see it knowing as little as possible about it. So if you have not seen Arrival yet and you're interested in seeing Arrival, press pause, go watch it now, and then come back and watch and or listen to our show.
Yeah.
All right. I feel like I've done my responsible thing as like a commentator now.
Yes, you've done your response. Thank you yet again. You have executed your responsibility like a professional. And now I shall begin my amateurish analysis.
All right. So we're talking specifically about how language can change the perception of time, because the key thing about this film is that the heptapods' language, they have both a spoken language, which we never interpret, but they have a written language.
Right.
And what Amy Adams' character discovers, what Louise discovers throughout this film, is that their language actually reflects the fact that they do not see time in a linear fashion. For them, to borrow another film phrase, everything is happening everywhere all at once. And by learning their language, Louise actually learns how to do this and then is able to teach the rest of humanity how to do this.
Really, another way of phrasing this is, can language do what psilocybin does?
That would be mushrooms for those not familiar with the scientific term. We are here. We are finally launching this thing.
I have been anticipating this moment, not just for the podcast, but we also have an eclipse in 3 days. And, you know, I'm a nerd.
Welcome to Does It Fly, everybody. I'm Tamara Kridsky. I am here with Dr. Hakeem Oluseyi, a.k.a. Dr. O. And you have obviously figured out that we are talking today about Mission Impossible.
Mission Impossible. If the mission is impossible, it's the right mission. Because, you know, that's kind of what happens, right? From what I've heard. So here's the deal. This is really touching on many different things simultaneously, right? It's touching on how the mind works. It's touching on the nature of time. And it's touching on how language works in written form. Because there are two languages. There is an audio language, but there's also this written language that is in terms of these circular glyphs. And they create these glyphs with one of their appendages that comes out like this black smoke. Man, I thought that was so cool the first time I saw it. I was like, whoa.
God, right? It was very, very cool. Almost like picture like an octopus coming out with its ink, but actually being able to draw one of these glyphs, or they call it a logogram in the film.
Yeah.
And each logogram has its own specific meaning.
And I've never seen anything like this in a movie before. So that really, you know, I love it when that occurs, right? Mm-hmm. So here's the question. This is not the first time I've heard this question. The question of, can language impact thought? And I will tell you why. So I love history, and, you know, I love different histories. And so one history that I got involved in were the first African-American astronomers. Okay. And so, you know, you had this guy in 1956, Carl Rouse, who gets a PhD from Caltech and goes into astrophysics, studying the sun's core. And then you have George Carruthers and my PhD advisor, my mentor, Art Walker, who get their PhDs in 1962, I think. And both of them do amazing things. They're both, their work has been non-trivial, let's put it that way. Then there was Charles Magruder, who got his PhD in the early 70s. And Charles was different, right? He didn't study stars like the others did. And he's first person to do extragalactic astronomy as an African-American. But then he did something very strange. And that is, he went to Germany to get his PhD. And so at the end of graduate school, my PhD advisor informed me that I should get to know Charles. And so I did get to know Charles. We worked together for many, many years. We worked together in Africa on helping to build scientific research in Africa. I asked Charles, why did you go to Germany? And Charles said, well, modern physics was invented in Germany. And I think that a reason why has to do with the German language, the way that the German language makes you think logically. And so I've run that idea by other physicists, and many other German physicists swear it's a real phenomenon. Okay.
That's
so
interesting.
Yeah. And so when I looked at the example in the movie of how just learning another language sort of unlocked doors in the hero's mind, it's not that far from that. So what is that phrase that they use in the movie, that particular theory that's been debunked?
So the particular theory, which is a real theory, is the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. And that's what this idea that the language that you speak affects the way that you think or process kind of reality or the world.
Right. So linguists have concluded that no, every language ever existed by humans is capable of encompassing every idea. That is not how language shapes the mind. But there is an effect that is not that drastic. And the one that I saw has to do with, there are some written languages that write left to right, and there are others that write right to left. And so if you look at the cinema of those particular societies, you will see that in the societies where you write left to right, that a lot of imagery moves left to right within the frame of those societies' movie outputs, right? And the opposite is true in those other societies. It moves right to left. Like we think of the past as behind you, the future is in front of you. There's this linear organization of time in our minds. And what they found is that when they studied people who don't have a written language, right? These are tribes, then they don't have any such bias, right? So those of us, we have a left to right bias and a linear bias. Others have a right to left bias, and those biases stem from our written languages.
Okay, I have a quick question for you. So when I'm just curious, actually. So when you were talking about the future and how we picture it, especially if you've grown up primarily in a household where you're reading English, so it's left to right. You said when you picture the future, you picture it in front of you, and you actually for those folks who are listening and not watching, he almost automatically did the gesture of putting his hand in front of him. And then when you said, in the past is behind you, and you gestured literally behind your body. When I'm talking about the past and the future, I talk about the future's in front of us, the past is behind us. But when I actually picture it, it's actually aligned with the writing. I picture the past being off to my left, and I picture the future being off to my right, which is different than in front of, and I'm in front of behind. So I just find that curious.
And think about in mathematics, the number line, right? Zero's in the center, and positive goes to the right, negative goes to the left. But even bigger is we have a linear organization of time in our minds. And so this species has a language that is written circularly, so there is no beginning, no end. And their time is also has no now, right? It is, which is strange because they come to us and I'm here right now to tell you about something that's going to happen in the future. But
yeah.
Because we see the future, we know what's going to happen.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that there is a basis for it, even though as they present it in a movie, it does not strictly hold to the extent that they claim it does. You're not going to, well, here's the other element of it. You can retrain your mind. If you start reading and writing in a mirror, you can get rid of, experimentally been shown, the left to right bias that exists in our minds. So what does she do? She begins reading these glyphs, these circular glyphs, and now she gains access to the circle of time.
Taking it sort of into biology a tiny bit, do you think it is possible then for this re-understanding, learning, reading this thing and understanding their flow of time in a different way to actually change the way, let's say, where our neurons and synapses are firing and signaling to each other?
Ultimately, it has to come down to that, right? It actually has to come down to these, neurons linking together and firing together sort of thing. Because it happens to you when you learn a particular science. You never see this world the same way again. Once you start to think of the world as, at the quantum scale, which is what I think every physicist does, you no longer can just see a glass of water as a glass of water, right?
Well, what do you see a glass of water as?
Well, you see all the molecules, you see them moving around, you can imagine the surface, and you can see the exchange with the vapor pressure, the partial pressure of water above it. Like it evaporates because there's this Maxwellian distribution of velocities of the water moving around, right? And so some of the molecules in there are beyond boiling temperature, even though most of them are at the temperature you say the water is. Some of them are super cold, moving really slow. The same thing with metals, right? You look at a metal, you look at it shining, and you're like, oh, I see the electrons in the surface absorbing and re-emitting light of all wavelengths to my eye. You just can't get away from it. Or when I learned to see the sky in 3D, right? Once I knew the sizes of objects in the solar system and in our local group of galaxies, and you see it, like when you know that the moon is a quarter the size of Earth, right? In our minds, we think of the moon as being close, right? Oh, if this is the moon, how far is the moon?
Right.
Typically you put it like somewhere right here, but it's really 65 Earth radii away. It's super far away, 65 times the Earth radius away. And once you see it, knowing it's at distance, the moon looks massively huge to you, right? Or when you look at the Andromeda Galaxy with the naked eye, which is 2 million light years away, and it's 3 times bigger than the full moon, or 6 times bigger than the full. Let's see, it's 3 degrees. Yeah, 6 times bigger than the full moon in the sky. You're like, holy cow, that thing is massive. You get the perspective, right? So new knowledge can change the way you see reality, for sure.
Okay, so here's a question then, and this is kind of connecting. I'm going to ask you to explain something I'm going to ask you to explain a very complex thing in like 3 sentences, and then potentially related to what we're talking about, right? So I fully am on board with this idea that, new knowledge helps us see the world in different ways. Although I'm now holding up a glass of water. This will, for me, still just be a glass of water always. But that said, that totally makes sense to me. I mean, we all do that. I see, film and TV in different ways because I've studied it.
Absolutely.
I see theater in different ways because I've studied it. That said, not only does Louise, Amy Adams' character, as the linguist in here, learn how to speak their language, it then affects the way that she experiences time, right? Where she is essentially experiencing the past, the present, and the future all at once. And so to me, in a way that goes a step further than just looking at something in a new way, because you're actually experiencing memory in a different way. So my question is, because we've talked a bit on this show about theories of relativity and the idea that everything is happening all at once. So for those who may not have heard those, this is where I ask you to get simply complex.
Right.
Can you give like a 2 to 3 sentence basic explanation of like how everything exists all at once? And then I would love to hear your thoughts on, do you think this language could essentially rewire our brain or open something up so that we perceive that? Do you know what I'm asking? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So when you look at time, like the 2 major theories are presentism and eternalism, right? So presentism is this idea that we described initially. Now is the present, the future is before us, the past is behind us, and it unfolds steadily unfolding. And then the other one is what is known as eternalism, or a block universe, where all the frames of time pre-exist and you just kind of move through them so you can have access to them. And the laws of physics are not silent on the matter. And one thing is that relativity seems to suggest that all times, because one thing about relativity is that every observer's observations are equally valid. They're all valid. So anything that has to do with a measurement of distance or duration, time duration, different observers that are in different energy states, meaning moving faster or slower, meaning moving are present in a different gravitational field, which is space-time curvature. And so the more mass energy density you have, the greater the space-time curvature. So basically it comes down to different energy states. You experience time differently. So there is no such thing as, oh, I am this tall, right? You're that tall relative to someone who is at rest relative to you, right? For someone that you're moving toward at a very high rate of speed, you would be different, right? It would be a different height. and your time would be moving differently. So you could take it that if there were different entities in different energy states observing you and deciding which you they see is now, all of them will be valid, but none of them will be looking at the same time. Right? So that suggests that all those times are just there, pre-existing. And now the question is, can you somehow open up your mind to be able to access it and see it that way?
Right.
Is deja vu future memory? Right? Is that or could you be quantum entangled? You can quantum entangle across space. Could you be quantum entangled or otherwise entangled with your future self? So what does entanglement mean? Entanglement means that entities that appear separate are actually a single entity. So future you and past you are the same you, right? They are the same entity. So are they still entangled? Our access to past me is what I call memory. My access to my future me would be a premonition, would be a deja vu, would be a prophecy, right? Or in the case of physicists, a calculation. But nerdy humor for you.
You gotta love a mathy witch.
Yeah. Well, look, the point is that I think that ultimately we don't know what time is. There's this guy who wrote a book. His name is Julian Barbour, I think is the way he pronounced it. It looks like Barber, but I think it's pronounced Barbour, who wrote a book called The End of Time. And his idea is similar to this block time thing where you have these frames. And as the universe moves from configuration to configuration, we perceive that as time. And we say duration is, something that we add in there between these different configurations. But all of this is to say is that time is an enigma. Time is an enigmatic thing, much like energy, right? It's something that we say all the time, but what is it really, right? What
Yep.
Yeah, what is the essence of this thing?
What is it really?
Yeah, what is it really? Like the whole idea of, I read a language and now I see the world differently. It's a tough one for me to say whether it's true or not, because there's so much can be true or not, because there's so much about time that we don't know. But then there are these experiences that we have and we chalk them up to, we'll say, I don't have an explanation for this, so I'm going to assign it to my favorite faith belief or my favorite, whatever. You don't have a conclusive observation. You just have this weirdness that you experience and you have to assign it to something you're familiar with. But as a physicist studying it, you look at the laws of physics and you see that there's no reason that time should move in one direction. It should move backwards just like it moves forwards, but we only ever see it move in one direction, right? And so some chalk that up to, it's because of entropy. Disorder is increasing. I don't know. I feel like, this is something that we still got to experiment and think hard about.
I love the idea that we don't know, and that your answer to does language change the perception of time might actually be, I don't know. I'm just reflecting back what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah.
Might actually be because we don't know enough about time yet to have a definitive answer. So could language unlock it?
But everything
Maybe.
adjacent to it seems to suggest maybe, right? Because, we know about how language does affect how we perceive things, and time is one of those. It's not as hard as was originally suggested when that theory was put forward. The idea of how you perceive reality, which is already biased in itself, right? The reality that we perceive is a biased reality that evolved for the purposes of us surviving and reproducing, right? It's what allowed that to occur. It's not all of reality. We do not sense all of reality. And could there be truly block time eternalism in existence? And there's a way for us to access that, in a way that is controllable. Maybe. So I'm going to say, I like deep thoughts. I like creativity. I like new looks. And even though they don't show the alien clearly, they're still well illuminated. So
Yes, your pet peeve is when movies are too dark. So it sounds like
I'm going out on a limb. Not necessarily exactly as they do it in the movie, but so much of the adjacent science seems to say that there is an impact And we know that you can unlock different things in your mind. And, there's so much we don't know, and the glyphs are so cool. It's flying.
Well, I love that. And that, like, talking about how cool the glyphs or the logograms are is kind of a perfect jump into the story of this, because that is something that they took a lot of time and a lot of care with. So this, technically, Denis considers this his first sci-fi film, and he wanted things to be a little different than previous sci-fi films. He worked with some crafts folks who had not done sci-fi stuff before. So they brought a fresh approach to it. And what's so interesting is that on one hand, this is like a big alien invasion movie. And we know our alien invasion movies. We've got like all the way back to Close Encounters, to Independence Day with Will Smith, like Attack of the Block.
Wait a minute. Is alien visitation by definition alien invasion?
So I would say that is a question for discussion about like the genre overall. Like that, I think when people are talking about aliens coming, it's usually referred to as like an alien invasion movie. Now, what kind of alien invasion movie is totally up for grabs, right?
Even
like
British musicians, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because you've got like your movie where it is, Attack of the Block. They're coming to do some destruction. You've got, I wouldn't call E.T. an alien invasion movie. That's a movie where they're explorers and they're sort of looking, and an alien gets lost and gets helped out by his friendly suburban family. So you've got all these different kinds of alien movies. In this case, we don't know. So I would call this an alien invasion movie because that's the construct that it follows. Those are the tropes that it follows.
It is.
And then what I think they do pretty brilliantly is they then poke up against those things. And they do that through Amy Adams' character, who is our linguist. And a little bit through Jeremy Renner's, but he's a physicist, and so doesn't have quite the same POV. In fact, in an interview, Amy Adams talked about the idea that she did not actually, she did a lot of studying about what it means to be a linguist and how they work, because that was her area of expertise, her character's area of expertise. But when someone was like, and what about, studying on the suits that you would wear and how you would greet the aliens, she was like, no. She was like, my character has never been in one of these suits before. She's never met aliens before. She's done field work, but not like this.
Right.
So, so for her, it was actually good to not know that stuff. Part of, I think, what makes this movie feel so authentic for me is the way that it takes that trope, and you have Amy Adams' character kind of poking up against it and saying, wait, hold on. We don't know that they're here to invade. We don't know that they're here to get us to war against each other. Like, let's actually get back to basics and just try to communicate. And at the same time, you also have this beautiful, very intimate movie about her own personal experience of love and loss. And what the alien language does in learning it is it allows her to, as we were saying, access the future as well as the past. But really, we're focused on the future here, almost as though she is having memories of the future. And or as you were saying, like a premonition, but it feels like something that's already happened. So there's a couple of things that help with that. One is going back to what we were talking about with the language that they develop. They actually created a whole language. They did it in collaboration with a Montreal-based artist whose name is Martine Bertrand, and they created a whole sort of Bible of these glyphs, which they would reference. Now, it's not like a full-on language, like it's not like Klingon or Na'vi, which is actually fully developed, and you can go and like probably I don't know, you can probably
learn
get
to
your
speak Klingon.
Yeah,
with
exactly.
your pals.
Right. So it's not that developed, but they did, go quite a distance in coming up with like a vocabulary and different, different pieces of what this would look like and a logic for the language. So that as she was going on her process and discovering, different pieces of it, it fell into place and made sense. And then we don't necessarily know exactly how she like cracked the language. We see her first breakthrough. And then, we see kind of a montage of like when she has the first breakthrough and realizing like, this is what this glyph means. It's sort of like, oh, a little bit here, a little bit there. And, you see her up late working and stuff like that. So, the way they set it up, I think is really conducive to drawing us into the story.
Oh, does it ever?
Yeah. So, I think that's a really important piece of things. And then, you add the production design to that, which is absolutely incredible. It actually won, it was nominated for a bunch of Academy Awards. It won for Best Sound Editing. But, there's cool things too, like the shape of the alien aircraft, the shape of the alien ship was inspired by an asteroid, 15 Eunomia, which has a very irregular shape. He didn't want it to look like kind of your typical big flat ship that a lot of us see, which of course I love all these ships. So that's no diss on anything else.
I think it might be a Kuiper Belt object, icy body out past Pluto. Is that the case? The name reminds me of the one. If it's
that would
not.
be your
All right. That name rings a bell. Yeah.
Oh.
But I didn't know that about it. I didn't know that about the shape being inspired by an astronomical object.
Yeah. And then because it is sort of a very vertical type of ship as opposed to a horizontal ship that we're more often used to seeing. And so that led the director to questions about like, how would humans navigate that? So he was able to play with different ideas of what gravity might be like inside. And the idea that they had created this chamber, the heptapods had created this chamber to actually welcome the humans in. I love so many of those things. The heptapod design was inspired by, a bunch of different things, including octopus, spiders, whales, elephants. They wanted to create something that didn't feel completely alien, but also would have a sense of like weight and bigness and awe and wonder.
Yeah, the imagery in this, and the other thing about what you often say when you analyze a story and the conceit together, you'll say something along the lines of, "How does it go toward telling the story?" You can't tell this story without the language, right? The linguist is the hero.
Yeah, and that's honestly why at the beginning of this I was like, we can't even talk about this without spoiling it. So they create this beautiful world. The language is the basis of it. And then, of course, the twist is we watch Louise throughout this whole story as she is having these flashes of what we think are memories, we in the audience watching, because we are very much, as we experience most films, right? Like think about how you experience a film. You watch it from the beginning to the end. You're not jumping around. You're going from the beginning to the end. And so as we're doing that, we see her have these flashes with her daughter and with her husband. And we think that they're memories. We think they're from the past. And he absolutely plays with that. There's a point where she says, I just realized, she refers to being single at a certain point earlier on in our experience of the movie. And then there's a point later on where she's had one of these flashes and she sort of doubles over and Jeremy Renner's character is like, what's wrong? And she's like, I just realized why my husband left me. And at that point, you think this has happened in the past, but it's actually a future flash. And then there's some crucial plot pieces where she gets information in one of these, what I like to think of as memories from the future, where she needs that information in the now of it that we're experiencing. So we're experiencing this movie in a linear fashion, watching what we think is our main character having memories. And then at a certain point, you find out as she basically cracks their language, no, this is actually, I'm now accessing the future. I'm accessing time all at once.
Well, wait a minute. What about when she goes, remember she's sitting in a chair across from this guy and she says, I see future people.
You are so stuck on Sixth Sense. And that's all we're going to say about that, because almost once a podcast, Hakeem tries to spoil Sixth Sense for people.
That's right.
So I think that, what's so interesting, so getting back to this linear thing, one of the things that's so interesting about this movie is that we experience it linearly, and then we come to understand that she is now experiencing time not in a linear way, but in a, as you described before, that like block time, everything all at once way. And when we do, our understanding completely changes. Now, am I suddenly able to access time that way because of watching this movie? No, but it certainly makes me think about that, and it makes me think about memory, and it makes me think about how the pieces of things that you know affect what you might do or not do. And ultimately in the film, it leads to this larger thematic question of, if you knew a larger thematic question really about free will, like if you knew if you saw the future constantly and the past, do you actually have free will, or is it set? And if you knew, even if you did have free will, if you saw it, would you change it? And in this case, something tragic happens to her daughter. That's not giving it away, actually, because that happens in the very beginning of the film. Like you see that early on, you know that early on that that's a piece of things. And she chooses not to.
Well, here's the
And
question. If you
yeah,
change it, what did you see? Because you did not see the future because you changed the future, right?
right.
So that makes me think again of, this quantum mechanical interpretation called the many worlds interpretation, where
Mhm.
at each decision point or measurement point in reality, time splits, universes split off. And so, if you change things, that future that you saw was a different timeline than the one, you chose to go to a different timeline. And that future still exists, but you don't experience it. So the story and the use of this is not just the language, it's the
Mhm.
language and time and her experience. Because, one of the things that often annoys me in a sci-fi movie is that they have to bring in human emotion and love and all
Mhm.
that stuff, right? Don't get me wrong, I love some love, right? I love
Yeah.
me a rom-com. But when I
Okay.
go for my sci-fi, I'm like, why are you throwing love in there? But this is a different kind of love, right? There's romantic
Yeah.
love, there's
Hater.
family, and it's related to this time thing.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like there are, parallel stories being told that come together. So for you,
And that precisely is why this movie flies so well for me, because they do knit it together so beautifully. I think that, I would have appreciated the alien language story no matter what, even if there wasn't something going on. But the fact that there were very, very human stakes attached to her when she suddenly understood that you could see, experience all time at once. It wasn't just like, oh, great. And now it didn't, like, that wasn't like the first half of the movie. And then the second act of the movie became, so now that we have this great power, what are we going to do with it?
right? Yeah, yeah.
Instead, the way it manifested was, how human am I going to be? And how do we now understand experiencing emotion and
Right.
relationships if love and loss essentially happen simultaneously?
Yeah.
And I thought it had something really beautiful to say about the world. So for
Yeah.
me,
So let me ask you this
Arrive.
personally. Okay, so
Yeah.
you say it flies.
So wait, let me give you
Yeah.
my definitive, and then we'll move on to the
Yes,
vibes.
your definitive answer.
So my definitive answer for does Arrival fly when it comes to the language changing the perception of time? Yes, it arrives in my heart and my brain in a massive, beautiful way.
The arrival arrived.
The arrival arrives for sure. Yeah.
So here's a question. Do you
Yeah.
subscribe to it's better to have loved and lost than not loved at all? Like, is the hurt worth the joy? Is the pain worth the joy?
I would say in general, yes, because I think
Yeah.
I think loss can shape us in certain ways. That
Yeah.
said, like, if I didn't have to lose, like one of my greatest fears is, things like my parents passing away. And so, so this is okay. This made me think of something. So what's so interesting? So my mom's father passed away when she was 12 and her brother was 8. He was 38 years old. He dropped out of a heart attack. Had it been like in more modern times, perhaps they would have detected whatever it was that made it happen, or, but not back then. And so, she grew up pretty much without a dad, taking care of her younger brother. Her mom's parents then each passed away within the next year and a half. So they were really very much, my grandmother's a very independent woman. But it very much shaped who my mom became. She'd been really close with her dad, and it very much shaped the kind of parent she became and all of that. So like, if I could go back in time and, not have my mom experience that loss, would I want that for my mom? Absolutely, because I would never want anything hard. I know how hard that was for her. At the same time, it shaped who she was. So I don't know that she would be the mom that I love.
You're cheating, though. You're cheating.
Without that.
You're cheating.
Why?
Because, we will sacrifice ourselves for our loved ones. So when you place it as a loved one, you would fix their pain, but you might, when it comes to your own, it's a different thing, And I think that sometimes it's a expectation thing. Like I've been saying this for the last few years to my friends, people I know personally. And I tell them what I observe, what I think I observe, right? But it's anecdotal. It's not a real, relative sample controlled experiment. It's just what I observed. And that's breakups and how people feel so devastated in the moment, or can feel devastated in the moment. And, and even like, I hate you now, right? But
yes,
almost in every case, if you go forward a few years, they tend to be happier. They tend to be more fulfilled. It's almost as if that breakup was a stepping stone to a better life.
So do you believe in the idea that everything happens for a reason? Like, do you
I hate to say it that way. I really hate to say it that way. But it does seem like there's something like that going on. But, horrible tragedy occurs. So I don't think that that's happening for some reason. I'm like, but at the same time, when it comes to these relationships and moving on, we're so resilient. And I look at long human history on the millions of years of time scale and what our species have been through. And I look at modern life and how easy it is in comparison. It's not easy within our own minds, but externally, there's, like I say, there's not a bunch of dudes about to roll up on horses and set the village on fire. At least not here where we are. I mean, there are places in the world where that is happening, right? And
I was going to say, there are actually places in the world where that's happening.
It
not
is,
in
right?
LA, not in DC.
But if you average it out over all humanity, things are, as safe as they've ever been as human history goes, which means that our ancestors had to deal with so much more and so, it's a tough one, but I do think that experiencing the love and joy is worth the pain. And if you understand that the pain isn't as tragic, and that's hard to tell you when you're 16 years old and you're in love, right?
Yeah, that's very hard. Cut to me sobbing in my room when my high school boyfriend broke up with me, which was just
that's not even a
mess. That was a mess.
Back when you're younger, you say things like, "I can't imagine you being with anyone else." You get much older, you're like, "Oh, I'm so happy for you." Right? Like, I'll give you an example. My first wife, we married, divorced at the age of 30. Okay. So all along, before me, she had a boyfriend for forever. Her high school boyfriend became her college boyfriend. And, they were an item at college. She was our, Miss Sophomore, Miss Junior. He was our basketball star. Everybody loved them as a couple. They break up. She and I date. We get married. And she would tell me about this one guy who always liked her. And she never gave him the time of day. Right. And I met the guy. Right. He did well in life. And, he was a nice guy, okay? When she and I divorced, we remained family. We've been cool because we had a daughter together, right? We did divorce the way you're supposed to, right? For the sake of our daughter.
You did a conscious uncoupling.
A conscious uncoupling, absolutely. She remarries, not the guy from high school, okay? Mm-hmm. They're married for a long time, and then eventually they separate. And guess who she's married to now? Right? That guy. And I'm just like, I'm so happy. My daughter was showing like, oh my God, I'm so happy for them. And I truly am. It's a great love story.
No, that's That's fantastic. I
Yeah.
wish everybody had such amicable ex relationships.
Yeah,
But
I know. Yeah.
so that brings up an interesting question for me, which is like along the lines of like our arrival vibes question. So given that, right, that you have previous marriages in your life, the ability that the language in Arrival gives to humans is the idea to not think of that in the past, but to
Right.
experience all of those things simultaneously. And
Right.
would you want that?
That's a good question.
Or do
Would
you
I
think,
want that?
I mean, it's hard to know because we're humans and this is our experience, but would you like,
Here
would you
here
want that?
is here is the way I'm going to shift that. It has to do to me with expectation. All right. So one
Okay.
thing that I hear people talk about failed marriages. I hear that phrase all the time. The marriage, they did not remain married until death. Right. Right. A successful marriage is one that ends in death.
I don't know that I agree with that definition actually, because, well,
Right.
maybe this is
If
what
you
you were going to say,
divorce,
but
people call a divorce a failed marriage. And the only reason we call it that is because of the expectation. And like
of
I
length.
said,
Yeah.
it is not necessarily a failure of anything. It might be the fact that you understood who you were as individuals, where you're going in life, and you think of your children and you separate and you try to do it what's best for everyone in the situation. And it's an evolution of life. It's an evolution of growth, right? So we have lived a life where we did not have expectation of that. And so one of the things that I had to come to in my own life, we are mortal beings, right? None of us is getting out of here alive. Can you accept that fact? And so many of us, we can't, right? We can't accept that. So we have to have eternal life. Or we have to say, you have a illness that you're not going to get past, but we have to pretend like, yes, I'm going to fight this and I'm going to win, even though you're not, right? But I'm accepting. I accepted my mortality a while ago, right? And I know that is what it is. And so if you're born into a world where that is what it is, it's a matter of accepting. Is it a matter of acceptance? Because the only reason why you have a preference is because of what you're accustomed to.
Yeah.
Potentially.
So what's interesting about Louise's character is that she, based on what you're saying, is that she is the transition between being born into a world where perceiving time this way goes from one to the other. Like she's born into the shift. So it's interesting to think about, like, if you were born into the time that was, transition can always be hard, but that's like a pretty major thing. So if you were born into that shift, would you embrace it as she does? Which I think goes back to your original question about, like, is it worth experiencing loss? Does loss help define us, who we are as human? Versus, the idea of, like, if you were given that ability, would you refuse the gift? And which ties back into a really key.
Now that's different.
point.
That's another framing of it, right? If it was given
Right.
as a gift, are you accepting of it? Because you know
Right.
what you're about to see, right? You know
Right.
what's in the future is not all good for anyone ever.
Well,
right?
no. And that's,
Yeah.
that's the key of this movie, right? And if you think about that, when she is talking with the aliens, they say they are giving them, and it is first interpreted as weapon instead of gift or tool or technology. And, some might say that it is a weapon in its own way, because the ability to fundamentally change how we perceive time, I think, changes something in humanity. I don't know if it changes it for the good or the bad, but it does change something. And so therefore some might say, this is a gift we don't want, as opposed to Amy Adams' character said, no, I see the worth in this gift because it allows me to fully embrace love and loss and the full spectrum of all that humans can experience. And
Yeah.
that is beautiful, which
And
is
you
what I
know
think the movie
what's-
is ultimately saying.
Like here's what's blowing me away right now. We're supposed to be doing a sci-fi podcast, and we get so philosophical.
Well, I think this movie lends itself to that, but I would also say that, like, some of the best sci-fi is philosophical because and not all of it has to be. Like, I love all my different types of sci-fi. Like we were talking about alien invasion tropes. Like, give me my alien invasion where there's like big crazy laser beams shooting up, big buildings, and it's just fun and it's an adrenaline ride. Like, I love all that crap. And then on the flip side, you've got a movie like this, which is very philosophical. I mean, you've got E.T., which is sci-fi, which is like sweet and fun and, different kind of sci-fi, but it's adventure.
Well, I think that in this movie, there's so much that is so new that it does, the idea of unlocking our minds, because of one conclusion that you're led to, if you think about life in the universe and what aliens may be and what humans are, is that they may be so different from us that it could be that different, right? Like, the fact of, I saw another thing in studying for this, that it was saying that there is a hierarchy of language. I think Noam Chomsky came up with it. And if you look at all human languages, they follow this same hierarchy. So even though structures are different, they're like, it's flipped from one side to the other. You flip the tree. The point they were making is that if an alien came to Earth, they could conclude that Earth has but a single language, because the structure is the same. So even though they seem so different to us, just like when we look at each other's faces, right? People look so different to each other. You don't see the same thing when you look at cows. They are almost identical to you. And so if you're looking at languages of different species from different planets, it will be so unlike anything that we have. And, I always say that my smell test for, is it really an alien in our real world? When I go on the news and they're asking about UAPs and UFOs, I'm like, my smell test is, how close to human is it? Is it the size of humans? Is it doing what humans would do? Then it ain't aliens, it's humans, because they would be so different, right? There would be, you could not imagine it. Like, if octopuses did not exist, would you imagine them, right? We take them and make many things like them in our sci-fi, but if we didn't have cephalopods, would you imagine them into existence? I
don't know. I'd like to put it this way. I'd like to think that we could. I'd like to think that the human imagination is powerful enough to put a what if out there and go in all sorts of crazy, interesting directions, and that we can imagine things that we have never seen or that have never been there before. And I actually think Star Trek is really good at doing that.
I was about to say that. That's what I was about to say. That's exactly what I was about to say. And you know where my mind went was the silicon-based life form, right?
Yes, me too. Oh my God.
Hey, on that note, clearly Arrival is flying for the vibes.
I've had so much fun having this conversation.
Same.
I love where our chats go.
Hey, we should sometimes like bring milk and cookies and like dip our milk and cookies in the milk while we have the podcast and build a fire. No, don't build a fire because we're indoors. But you know what I'm saying? We should hang out like we're in person, even though we're not in the same room.
All right, we'll do a lunch date one of these times.
Yeah.
We would love to hang out with all of you more. So if you have enjoyed this episode of Does It Fly, we usually drop a new episode every Friday. And Hakeem, where can they find us?
They can find us at doesitflypod.com. They can find us at Does It Fly on TikTok. You can find us on grants.gov. Okay, I made that up.
Okay, not yet. But if the government does want to give us a grant to continue with this, we would happily take it. Join us next time. Either watch the video podcast or on your favorite audio podcast. And we will see you soon. Thanks again.
See you soon. Come hang out with us and have a great time.